A fake compliance officer stormed Clint Redford's land, demanding he get rid of his legally licensed chickens. The man, hiding behind a phony badge and unmarked SUV, had bullied others before. But this time he picked the wrong retiree. Clint still had access to the county's agricultural licensing system and used it to trigger a full fraud investigation. But just wait until you see how this quiet farmer turned the tables and why justice clucked back louder than ever. Clint Redford stood barefoot in the soft dirt, brushing cedar shavings off his jeans as the last hen waddled into the shade of the coop. The late morning sun had just started to heat the gravel when he heard tires crunching slowly up his driveway, a sound he wasn't expecting. A white SUV rolled to a stop near the gate. No license plates, no county seal, just a generic vehicle with a flashing blue light suction-cupped to the dashboard like a last-minute costume. The windows were tinted dark, too dark for someone representing the neighborhood to be riding around in. Clint's gut tightened. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out with the kind of confidence that didn't match the outfit. He was in a navy polo that read, "Compliance Officer," in stitched white thread. No badge, no name tag, no official logo. In one hand he held a clipboard, in the other a roll of tape. His walk was quick, deliberate, and without greeting. "You're in violation," the man snapped before he even reached the gate. "HOA doesn't permit livestock. Chickens gotta be gone by sundown, or it's a fine per animal, per day." Clint didn't respond right away, not because he was confused, but because it felt surreal. His property, all 3 acres of it, had been zoned agricultural since the 1960s and explicitly excluded from the HOA's charter when it formed a decade ago. He had the papers to prove it. The hens behind him weren't pets. They were tagged licensed livestock under county law. So he asked, steady and polite, "Which department are you with?" The man didn't answer, didn't even flinch. He just marched up to the mailbox post, peeled off a piece of duct tape, and slapped a bright orange violation notice onto the wood like he was marking a crime scene. It looked homemade, no letterhead, no code reference, just large, bold letters and a threat of escalating fines. Clint watched in silence as the man stepped back, raised his phone, and began snapping photos. He took a dozen shots of the coop, of Clint's front porch, even of the rain barrel tucked beside the shed, muttering about documenting non-compliance. When Clint asked again for his name and credentials, the man didn't speak, just walked back to the SUV, closed the door, and drove off, slow, like he wanted Clint to feel watched. The gravel hadn't even settled before Clint felt a chill in his chest. Not fear exactly, but something colder. Something that said, this wasn't just a mistake, it was a message, and whoever sent it didn't know who they were messing with. By midweek, the white SUV was back. Same man, same unmarked vehicle. He didn't knock, didn't speak, just parked at the edge of Clint's property line, engine idling, windows up, watching. He sat there for nearly 20 minutes, sunglasses on, phone in hand, staring through the windshield like he was casing a crime scene. The chickens wandered freely in the shaded run, pecking at feed like they didn't know they were under surveillance. Clint watched from his porch, arms folded, lips pressed tight. He didn't wave, didn't flinch, but inside something curdled. It kept happening. Monday mornings, Thursday afternoons, sometimes Saturdays too. The SUV would appear and idle, the man inside pretending to type notes or take pictures through the tinted glass. He never stepped out again, but the message was the same. "I'm watching. I'll be back." Then, a week later, Clint returned from the hardware store to find the coop door wide open. 3 hens were missing: Henrietta, Gladys, and Rue. They weren't just livestock. They were his prize layers. Rue was hand-raised from a hatchling. The gate latch was still secure, but the hinge bolts had been removed. Quietly, deliberately. Someone had come prepared. Clint stood there for a long moment, the feed bucket hanging slack from his hand, the other hens nervously pacing in the grass. There were no feathers scattered, no tracks in the gravel, no sign of wildlife. He called the sheriff's office, and when the deputy arrived, Clint laid out everything: the visits, the false violation notice, the unmarked car, the disappearing hens. The deputy listened without interrupting. Then he said, low and grim, "You're the third this month. Always chickens. Always some guy calling himself HOA enforcement. Badge looks real until you check the agency." Clint nodded once, jaw tightening. This wasn't oversight. It was intimidation. And it wasn't just about chickens anymore. The anger that had been simmering under Clint's calm exterior finally locked into focus. This man, this Officer Hale, had crossed a line. He wasn't just pushing HOA rules where they didn't belong. He was targeting rural homes, picking on people who didn't have the means or know-how to push back. But Clint wasn't just any homeowner. For 28 years, he'd served as a senior officer with the County Agricultural Licensing Board. Every one of his birds was tagged, documented, and certified under his own authorizations before and even after retirement. His name was still tied to the system. His login still worked. So, while Hale kept driving by, smug behind his tinted glass, Clint pulled out his old files, booted up his secure console, and opened a new folder. He wasn't going to yell. He wasn't going to chase him down the road. He was going to bury him with paperwork. Clint Redford didn't yell. He didn't pace the porch or storm into town. Instead, he sat down at his desk, pulled out his old credentials from the bottom drawer, and powered on his secure county-issued tablet, still linked to the agricultural licensing database through a lifetime consultant ID. He wasn't just angry. He was methodical. He typed in Hale. Nothing. Then he cross-checked regional complaints flagged under unauthorized enforcement activity. And there it was, dozens of community-submitted incidents. Always the same pattern: someone calling himself a compliance officer showed up in unmarked vehicles, issued false notices, threatened fines, and pressured residents into giving up property: chickens, wood piles, rainwater systems, even off-grid solar equipment. Victims were elderly, veterans, or people living just far enough outside city limits to be isolated. Clint dug deeper and matched the face from his trail cam footage. High-resolution shots captured the man walking past the coop, against a license record from a short-lived business, Community Standards Enforcement, LLC, registered under the name Kyle Wilburn. Wilburn had no badge, no authority, no right to step foot on Clint's land, and yet, for over a year, he'd been running what looked less like an HOA operation and more like a personal racket, weaponizing the image of local governance to harass and intimidate. He'd built a business on fear and silence. But Clint wasn't afraid, and he sure wasn't silent. First, Clint compiled a detailed report, time-stamped and indexed with photos, video, and public property maps showing his exemption from HOA oversight. He hand-delivered it to the sheriff's office the next morning and spoke directly with Sergeant Gilmer, a former colleague who remembered Clint from county inspections. Then, Clint made a second call, this time to the County Agricultural Board. There was a clause buried deep in local ordinance: any theft, harassment, or interference involving registered livestock on protected agricultural land triggers immediate review by the County Fraud Division. The key was that it had to come from a certified witness, someone qualified to confirm the licensing violation. Clint wasn't just the victim. He was a licensed authority. He filed the paperwork, notarized it, and submitted it not as a homeowner, but as a former licensing officer with jurisdictional authority. And that changed everything. Within 72 hours, Kyle Wilburn's business license was suspended pending investigation. His accounts were frozen by the Fraud Division. Community Standards Enforcement, LLC, was flagged for operating under false pretenses. A formal county advisory went out to every HOA in the region. No such enforcement entity exists. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was precise, the kind of justice built line by line, with facts that couldn't be denied, and a paper trail long enough to choke out a lie. 2 weeks later, Clint Redford sat exactly where he belonged, on the wide front porch of his farmhouse, boots up on the railing, a mason jar of sweet tea sweating in his hand. The air was warm, birdsong drifting through the sycamores, and the only real sound was the soft cluck of hens behind the coop. Then came the low rumble of engines. Not one, but 3 black SUVs rolled slowly down the gravel road and turned onto a driveway half a mile east, Wilburn's property. Clint didn't get up. He didn't need to. From where he sat, he had a clear view through the oak trees. Deputies stepped out, calm and practiced. One of them, Sergeant Gilmer, knocked once. Wilburn opened the door in gym shorts and a wrinkled polo, trying to play casual. But when the cuffs came out, no one mistook the moment for routine. Neighbors gathered at their fences. Phones came out. A few people clapped. Clint didn't. He just sipped his tea and watched as the man who had tried to intimidate him with threats and false authority was quietly led down his own front steps, past his overgrown lawn and the same SUV that had parked outside Clint's gate so many times. The county issued a formal public notice the next morning. It declared, in plain terms, that Kyle Wilburn had no affiliation with any government agency, that his company had been operating under false pretenses, and that multiple rural homeowners were targeted in a pattern of coercive behavior. But one detail stood out more than the rest. The notice specifically cited Clint Redford's agricultural parcel as a textbook example of fully licensed, protected farm animal management. That same day, the sheriff stopped by personally. In the bed of his truck, 3 hens, Henrietta, Gladys, and Rue, looking annoyed but otherwise unharmed, pecking at seed scattered across a crate. They'd been recovered from a small pen behind Wilburn's workshop, enclosed by a chain-link fence and camouflaged with a tarp. Stolen, hidden, but traceable. Clint took them back in gently, murmuring their names like nothing had ever changed. And then he added a final touch. Out by the coop, he installed a small, motion-activated speaker, weatherproof, wired to a solar panel and positioned near the gate. It didn't bark warnings or blast alarms. Instead, whenever anyone walked near the fence, it played a crisp, loud chorus of chicken clucks. Clint called it his compliance system, not to scare anyone, but to remind the next passerby that the real authority on his land wore feathers, not badges, and they had names.